Many martial arts practitioners are aware that most Aikido techniques are not effective. Yet that is mainly due to poor training methodology where there is no pressure testing or practicing against live, resisting opponents. Which brings me to a question. If all of Aikido techniques would be pressure tested, which ones would be the most effective and which ones would still not be useful? For the past couple of years, I've been exploring and experimenting with this question myself, testing various Aikido techniques against practitioners of different martial arts. Sometimes I was successful, other times I wasn't. But last year, I met Chistopher Hein, an Aikido instructor who has been pressure testing and making Aikido work for the past 2 decades. So I decided to call Chistopher and to compare our discoveries by ranking Aikido techniques with a score from S to F, based on how functional the technique can be made by putting it into action and pressure testing it. With each technique, I'll be the first one to share what I discovered so far and to rank it. And then, I'll ask Chistopher to see how he would rank the same technique and to see how our assessments differ. The first technique we took a look at was Ikkyo, translated as the first principle. A technique where the Aikidoka uses the attacker's elbow to control them. Here are my thoughts. So I heard some stories of Ikkyo working, some BJJ people using the elbow, not like really to immobilize people on the ground, but to manipulate the elbow to get into a better position. I guess it kind of makes sense, the technique, but I haven't explored it that much. I haven't encountered functional versions of it. I'd say Ikkyo, I'd put it somewhere in the middle, thinking that it may have that potential to work. And I think I even heard you once saying something good about Ikkyo. Where would you put that?
I would actually put it maybe even in the super category. I'd put it in the A category. But not Ikkyo as a form. And so I think it's important to distinguish the technique itself from the form. So forms are this process I go through, like Shomanuchi Ikkyo Motte or something. But Ikkyo itself is elbow control. I mean, that's the basic idea of Ikkyo. Some people might see it more as like, in Japanese you call it Kensetsu Waza, right? It's like joint techniques or something. I don't think of it as a joint technique at all. I think of it as elbow control. And the reason I would put it so high is because if you've ever been in any kind of situation, especially if you're talking about dangerous self-defense armed situations, controlling someone's elbow is absolutely essential, because when someone's arm's flailing around, it's really hard to get their wrist, to grab their wrist out of the air. Super, super hard to do that. And if you grab at their shoulder, it's easy to get a hold of their shoulder, but their shoulder doesn't really give you any control over the arm. So elbow control is the nice midsection between the shoulder and the wrist, and it's usually pretty easy to get. And if I control someone's elbow, usually I can keep them from stabbing me or hitting me or doing anything else. Elbow control, I think, is super, super important. And then Ikkyo, as it starts to become a form, shows a way that we can turn that elbow control into an unbalancing technique that we could use as a takedown, or we could use it as a projection. And then we could hold someone on the ground with it. And I've made videos talking about the Ikkyo pin, and there are definitely a lot of weaknesses to the Ikkyo pin. It's not super secure. I would take top mount over Ikkyo pin any day in a security situation. But in a situation where I didn't know if the other guy was armed or not, I would rather have Ikkyo because I could bail out of there quicker than I can something like top mount. I think Ikkyo is highly functional, but in a gross sense and not in a specific, like, here's how you take them down and hold them to the ground. I don't think it's that functional in that sense.
Hey, that's awesome. And I had doubts if we'll get to any super techniques. that's
I mean, start. I use it constantly. So like when we do rondori and stuff, I use Ikkyo nonstop. I've got some live footage of it coming off in live situations. And it does, but to see it completely like a form is kind of rare. And I think that's a lot of the problems with the Aikido techniques, is it's hard to not confuse them with the form. And the form's one really specific situation, you know? So the technique of Ikkyo, which is elbow control, super functional. You need it. Like in a self-defense situation, you can't live without it in lots of ways because people's arms are just too dangerous, right? So, you know, in boxing, I can high cover or something or low cover, and that's great if someone's just gonna hit me, but if someone's coming in with a knife, I can't really high cover. The knife goes right through there and gets me anyways. Something that gives me elbow control is real essential.
The second technique was Nikyo, or the second principle, where the wrist is manipulated in a usually painful way to either submit or disarm an attacker. My first thoughts, I know a bunch of people in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu pulling off Nikyo. I still haven't got to that point, although it's high on my list. Still, I have those questions. How would I get to that point? Does it really come up often? I'd be between B and C, but let's say B.
It really depends on how you're using it. If you're talking about Nikyo as a controlling technique, like I want to take someone down with it, or I want to hold someone still with it, it's okay. I would maybe put it at a D. Now, if you're looking at it as a clearing technique, how to get someone's arm off of me, I would say it's pretty high, right? So maybe a B or an A. Nikyo can really wrench someone's arm off you if they've got a good control on the side. If we're talking about disarming, I would put it in the A or S category because it's a super disarming technique. Nikyo and Kotegaishi to me, and we'll probably get to Kotegaishi in a minute, are essential disarming techniques. So if you're going to take something out of someone's hand, you have to know those two. It really depends on how you're looking at it.
I really like how you're distinguishing A or B for this element, B for that element, to kind of find the middle. If we'd qualify the technique for specifically how useful it could be, kind of finding the average usefulness, what would be the middle score?
I think where you put it at B is fine because to me, it's really low for a hold or a submission, but very, very high for a clear or a disarm. And so, averaging out, it's probably in the B-ish category, I would say.
Got it. The third technique was Sankyo, or you guessed it, the third principle. Sankyo uses a wrist turn and a locked out elbow to either move or pin an attacker. I know it works as a back escape. I tried that was great, but that's a very specific situation. I did lift up a couple of people by Sankyo. I did catch a couple of people even in standing. The part where I go under the armpit is questionable. I think there's potential in Sankyo. I'm also maybe affected by your positivity. I didn't expect the techniques to score so high. But let's say I put it on 8.
It's interesting to watch kind of how you're assessing them because I think you're assessing them really from a domination standpoint. That's the way a lot of people look at martial arts, is that, martial arts are about dominating. And I tend to look at martial arts that I'm interested in as about survival, right? So I just want to get the hell out of there most of the time. I don't want to sit and prove who's the best. I see how to you, Sankyo seems better than Nikyo because I think it is a little bit better for controls and holds and submissions. It's a little more useful than Nikyo in that category. But it's also less useful to me in clearing and disarming techniques. Now, it is a decent disarming technique and it is a decent clearing technique, but it's not nearly as functional as Nikyo is for that. And so to me, it's a little lower than Nikyo. I would put Sankyo underneath Nikyo. But if we're averaging out like you're talking about, I would say let's go for a B, because to me, it is a better controlling technique and a better submission technique, just not as good at clearing and disarming.
I guess I am in that stage. I'm interested in self-defense and I always think about self-defense, but my main focus is combat sports these days. I'm going to like a few kickboxing classes per week, some jiu-jitsu, and I realize it's not self-defense, but at the same time, that's what I do these days. Maybe that's one of the reasons why my focus is more like, okay, how does it work in a fighting situation? It's almost like the reflection of, I'm still just starting out in this journey and you've already been on this journey for a long time and you matured into that aspect of, okay, well, fighting, combat sports, yeah, it's fun, but self-defense is actually what really matters because that's life preservation.
I think that focus is important to talk about too, because I've said to people before, if you're sub 25, you're interested in a different kind of thing than over 25.
We then looked at Irimi Nage, entering throw, where the Aikidoka enters next to the attacker to perform a throw using the arm across the attacker's neck or face. Entering and throwing someone, I think that's possible. If I'm thinking about combat sports, very difficult because people are always kind of being safe about their distance. If it's a random dude who doesn't know what's happening, I presume that it's much more likely. The throw itself, how it's done, just like by holding the back and going by the neck, I'm somewhat skeptical about it. I've found like there's the wrestling knee tap, which looks quite Irimi Nage-like thing, just modifying it somewhat, like using the hips more. I think it can work pretty well. I'd say A, B, but let's say A. Let's be positive.
If we're talking about sport martial arts, I would put it significantly lower. In no time in mixed martial arts did I ever pull off an Irimi Nage. In live sparring, it comes off from time to time, but usually heavily modified as how we see it in Aikido. I have pulled it off with weapons, but it's just never had a lot of functionality for me. To me, the principle of Irimi Nage is a throw that happens from the rear position. So once you get behind someone, how do you throw someone? And I think that's highly functional, like trying to get behind someone. And it's surprisingly easy if people aren't trained. If I was judging my sport martial arts experience and Irimi Nage, I would say, it's maybe a D or an E. As far as like what the potential is, it's very high.
But let's say the average.
Let's leave it at C.
The fifth technique we examined was Kaiten Nage, or rotary throw, where the Aikidoka sweeps the arm back until it locks the shoulder joint, then uses forward pressure to throw. I'll try to throw curveball and choose a technique now, which I have pretty big doubts about. And that's Kaiten Nage.
Interesting.
If it would be heavily modified, like if we look at like the underlying principles of it, and especially the moment where snapping down the neck and maybe using the arm to throw, maybe I could imagine it. But if we're thinking about Kaiten Nage is the whole going under the armpit, turning out, doing this big circle of an arm and getting the arm up top. Like that whole approach just seems almost impossible. I don't know what made people think that someone could pull that off in a fight, but if we modified heavily and skip the beginning and we look just at the point where it's the hand is on the head, somehow locking the elbow, maybe even not throwing, maybe just sitting with the person down, if we would still call it Kaiten Nage, I could see that being possible, but my doubts about Kaiten Nage are high. So I'd say,
wow, that's funny.
D. Okay, hit me.
Okay. I find variations of Kaiten Nage fairly useful. I would put it much higher, and I would put it higher as far as sport martial arts go, and I would put it higher as far as self-defense goes. When you got someone going low for a low leg tackle, especially if they're not someone who's a trained wrestler and they're doing a perfect shot where they're keeping their back straight, and that makes Kaiten Nage just about impossible. But most people don't. Most people dive with their head. When people are diving in at you head first, Kaiten Nage appears kind of a lot. So to me, again, you have to separate the form from what the technique itself is. And to me, all the technique is I'm keeping one arm open to the side and I'm controlling the head. And so if you look at that off of any bad shot, if I get the back of neck control and I get one arm out to the side and I can go that direction, that will come up a lot. And I have students who come up with it regularly. I would put it much higher for sport martial arts. Now, I think if you think of the form where it's like someone's holding your wrist and you turn to the outside and you cut your hand down, catch the top of their head and you extend their spine and so it's tight. And then when you move just a little bit, they fly through the air. That's not going to happen.
That's very interesting and makes me think about my Aikido journey. It's something I already considered kind of a flaw in my approach of exploring it, that I end up doing it with high-level combat sports guys. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt coach, Jesse Ankam, the karate nerd who's been doing karate for the entire life. I go to these people because I want the highest level of advice from, the people who have the most experience. But at the same time, when I test these techniques with them, they're not the regular type of human being. I couldn't even pull off most functional techniques that against them because they're so good. That should be like the last step. I should go to these people only after I'm like so good at these techniques.
I think an important thing to point out, and this is an argument I've heard a lot, and it's a good argument, that, well, if you can pull off those things against high-level people, then of course you'll be able to pull off the stuff that works against high-level people against low-level people. The only problem with that idea is that a lot of times you can kind of round corners with people who don't know what they're doing that you can't round with people who are really good. That rounding of corners can make things come off faster and better. And so a lot of times, if I'm just trying to preserve myself, I can take a lot of quick chances with someone who doesn't know how to grapple that I could never do with someone who knows how to grapple. If you're looking about self-defense, what is the average person going to do most of the time? That's not to say that you shouldn't do some heavy stuff with guys who are really good, because you should understand that game too. But look, I am never going to, in a self-defense situation, grapple a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I'm going to shoot him from as far away as I possibly can. What is the regular guy going to do who maybe comes up on me? That's what I'm looking at most of the time. Possibly. I mean, I would definitely put it up in the B-ish category for sure. I mean, even if we're looking at sport martial arts, it's highly functional. And to me, it's Aikido's only answer for low stuff. And I think it answers most of the common low attack problems.
I'm glad you said that. It changed my mind. I was very skeptical about it.
The next technique was Yonkyo, or the fourth principle, which is a shoulder control similar to Ikkyo, but with both hands gripping the forearm. Then the knuckles from the palm side are applied to the attacker's radial nerve to cause pain.
The trouble I have with Yonkyo is imagining, okay, it's 2-on-1. It's better than nothing. But then to manipulate the entire arm through holding just the forearm, that seems not so likely. I'd put it at an E.
If you're looking at specific forms and what the form gets done, not very likely, especially if you're looking at combat sports. I look at Yonkyo simply as a gripping technique. Yonkyo is a way to grab someone and drive the index knuckle in to the bones in their arm, right? Or it can be their leg or their face. And I like to mess with my students and do all kinds of different ways. But anytime I grab something, if I can wrap my hand around it, I can Yonkyo it. That for me has been highly functional in dealing with bratty kids, over the top drunk people, where I'm not going to punch them, I'm not going to hit them, I'm ideally not going to throw them or anything, but I want them to act right. And if I grab them and apply some Yonkyo, they tend to go, oh, that hurts. And you give them a menacing look and they tend to de-escalate a little, right? To me, Yonkyo is really good in that kind of capacity. I was taking a firearms class with an ex-Delta Force guy, and he protects like celebrities and stuff like that. And he was saying one of the most useful tools in his arsenal is a pin. And I was like, why? And he's like, well, because when I'm moving through crowds of people, if I've got some guy who's kind of being a jerk, and I stick the pin in their ribs and it hurts. And then I give him a menacing look, and maybe I go towards a gun. And he's like, with a little bit of pain and a menacing look, they quit escalating. And that's all he wants, is to de-escalate them, right? So he doesn't want to hit someone, because then that goes in the newspaper, right? If that guy really wanted to hurt the celebrity, that pin would do nothing. But if he's on the fence at all and he realizes, oh man, this is a 6'5", 300-pound, like athletic looking dude, I'm not going to do well anyways. Like, that was more than enough to stop me. And so Yonkyo to me is that kind of thing, where it's encouragement to de-escalate. So you're not going to win a fight with Yonkyo, but anyone who's riding the fence a little bit, Yonkyo is a really good technique, and can be applied so subtly by just grabbing someone and applying a little Yonkyo. And it's like, oh, I didn't like that feeling, and maybe it's going to get worse. I think it's good in that capacity. If you're looking at sport martial arts, it's an F. For a situation that I need to de-escalate a little bit, it might be a C or a B. Let's give it a D, and I think that'll average everything out. Let's give it a D.
The following technique was Juji Nage, or the figure 10 throw, where the Aikidoka throws the attacker by locking their arms against each other. Again, that question is always there, like, how do you get to that point? What has to happen? Thinking about trained guys, oh, that's tough. Untrained people, who knows? They're crazy and unpredictable. Part of me is skeptical, part of me is hopeful. I'll play it safe and say D.
I might put it at a C. Juji Nage, as far as like getting in an unarmed situation, is highly unlikely, because people don't cross themselves like that very often. And most people are strong enough to resist you crossing them unless you're really strong. However, in armed situations, Juji will come up a ton. Imagine I was going to stab you with a knife. You're holding this hand. If I clear this hand and start to stab you over here, then you'll reach across your body to grab the knife to stop me from stabbing you on this side. And I get Juji a lot. So anytime you pull the knife across their body and you're isolating one side, they'll reach across to stop you. And when they reach across to stop you, it's fairly easy to crush that other arm on top of it.
That's really interesting, because I just realized you also include when you have a weapon and you're sparring. Because for me, it's like, I never consider that, because the martial arts guy, you're the one defending against the weapon. Unless, I don't know, I use a stick like an improvised weapon. Already by looking at the 7 chosen Aikido techniques and hearing Chistopher's discoveries about them, my mind was changed dramatically on what potential they could have. In the next video, we will continue to look at the remaining 9 Aikido techniques. Meanwhile, check out Chistopher's channel here, or take a look at my Aikido versus Judo sparring here, where I used my modified functional version of Aikido. Thank you for watching, and as always, I wish to own your journey.